She walked onto that court a wild card. She left it a phenomenon no opponent dared face. When a world-ranked professional, mid-match, stopped, stared across the net, and effectively surrendered, the entire WTA circuit fell silent. Nobody in tennis history had witnessed anything remotely close to this. A decorated champion, battle-hardened across hundreds of professional matches, looked at a 20-year-old Filipina and decided she simply could not be stopped. What happened on that court didn't just shock the crowd, it fractured every assumption the tennis world ever held about Alex Eala. Stay until the final word, because what unfolded across those weeks at Miami will permanently change how you understand this woman, this moment, and this sport. Nobody handed Alex Eala a seat at the table. She arrived at the 2025 Miami Open carrying a wild card. Not a seeding, not a reputation among the elite, not the kind of name that made draw committees nervous. At world number 140, she was supposed to be filler, scheduled cannon fodder for whoever landed in her bracket early, the kind of player tournament organizers slot in knowing she'll exit quietly, adding zero disruption to the projected outcomes for the top seeds. And yet, from the first ball she struck on that Florida hardcourt, something felt dangerously different. Born in Manila, molded at the Rafael Nadal Academy in Spain, Alexandra, or Alex Eala, had spent the formative chapter of her athletic life absorbing the philosophy of one of the most disciplined competitors the sport had ever produced. Nadal didn't teach players just to hit the ball. He taught them to suffer, to grind, to manufacture belief out of nothing. And somewhere in those years of sweat and repetition on Spanish clay, Eala absorbed something that no ranking number could quantify. She arrived in Miami not nervous, hungry. Her parents, Mike and Riza, had built a household around competitive fire. Her mother was a professional swimmer who had represented the Philippines at the 1985 Southeast Asian Games. Athletic sacrifice wasn't a foreign concept in Eala's world. It was breakfast conversation. Her younger brother was already picking up a racket. The family didn't produce athletes who played for participation. They produced people who played to win. When Eala stepped into the round of 64 draw at Miami, her assigned opponent was Jelena Ostapenko, a Latvian powerhouse, a Grand Slam champion, a woman whose flat, explosive ball striking had dismantled far more experienced opponents than a wild card from the Philippines. Nobody gave Eala a realistic chance. Ostapenko was ranked inside the top 30. She'd won Roland Garros. She'd competed at the highest level for nearly a decade. Her game was built to overwhelm, to dominate from the baseline with a ferocity that left opponents simply guessing. Eala dismantled her. Clean, composed, devastatingly efficient. Eala moved through that match with the kind of clarity that makes experienced observers go quiet and reach for their notepads. There was no luck in it, no Ostapenko collapse, just Eala executing at a level that didn't belong to her ranking. The tennis world noticed, briefly, then collectively shrugged. One win, a wild card upset. These things happened. What happened next? Nobody shrugged at. Madison Keys had won the Australian Open. Let that land for a moment. One of the most powerful servers on the women's circuit, a player who had invested years into becoming an elite champion, Keys arrived at Miami ranked 5th in the world. She was seeded. She was favored. She was the kind of opponent that wildcard players lose to politely and then disappear from the bracket with a handshake and a press release about gaining valuable experience. Eala didn't read that script. What happened across those sets was less a tennis match and more a systematic demolition. Eala's footwork anticipating angles before Keys even committed, her returns cutting off pace that had destroyed opponents all season, her mental composure resembling someone playing their 100th major rather than someone who technically shouldn't have been in the building. Keys went to her coach during the changeover at one point, and the body language communicated everything words couldn't. This wasn't going the way it was supposed to. When the final ball landed and Eala raised her arms, not in theatrical celebration, just in relief and confirmation, the crowd at Miami erupted, not politely, genuinely. The kind of crowd reaction that means people are witnessing something they know they will describe to other people for years. A wild card had eliminated a Grand Slam champion. Eala was now in the round of 16, and waiting for her, Iga Świątek, world number 2, French Open champion, the closest thing the women's tour had to a guaranteed outcome. A player so dominant across recent years that opponents frequently seemed to be competing not for victory, but simply for respectability in defeat. Eala, apparently, had not received that briefing. The match against Świątek became the moment that transformed Eala from a compelling underdog story into something that tennis world genuinely couldn't categorize. She didn't just compete against Świątek, she imposed herself. She dictated rallies. She forced the world number 2 into uncomfortable exchanges, into positions where the safe answer wasn't available, where the point had to be earned through something extraordinary rather than through accumulated dominance. When the final score confirmed Eala's victory, the silence at Miami lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then the noise became something animal and electric. She had just defeated Iga Świątek, a wild card, ranked 140th, 20 years old. The WTA circuit collectively exhaled and then immediately started asking the question nobody had prepared an answer for. What exactly is Alex Eala? Because just when everyone thought they'd seen the ceiling, her next opponent gave tennis its most stunning non-match in recent memory. Paula Badosa was ranked 11th in the world, a Spaniard, experienced, physically formidable, a player who had scaled the upper reaches of women's tennis and proven she belonged there across multiple seasons. She had won titles, she had beaten top 5 players, she knew what pressure felt like, and she knew how to absorb it. When the draw confirmed that Badosa would face Eala in the round of 16, the tennis community braced for what many predicted would be Eala's first legitimate test, an opponent who wouldn't be caught off guard, who had studied what Eala had done to Ostapenko, Keys, and Świątek, and who would arrive at that match prepared, disciplined, and determined to end the wildcard's extraordinary chapter in Miami. Badosa withdrew before the match began. The WTA announcement cited injury. The official language was measured and clinical, standard procedural communication. But the timing, the context, the weight of what had just preceded that withdrawal, none of that was clinical, none of it was standard. Badosa had watched Eala eliminate 3 dangerous opponents, including the world number 2, with a precision and composure that defied reasonable explanation. She had witnessed, alongside the rest of the tennis world, a 20-year-old from the Philippines move through a WTA 1000 draw as though the occasion created 0 psychological friction, as though the bigger the opponent, the sharper her focus became. And then she withdrew. The tennis internet fractured. Within hours, social media became a war zone between 2 entrenched positions. The first, Badosa's withdrawal, was entirely legitimate. Injuries happen in professional sport, and attributing anything beyond physical misfortune to the decision was unfair and irresponsible. The second, the timing was extraordinary, the optics were undeniable, and whatever the official explanation, something unprecedented had rooted inside this tournament. An aura around Eala that opponents were beginning to feel before the first ball was even struck. Fan comments poured in from across the globe. Filipino supporters flooded every platform with unbridled celebration. International tennis communities debated. Former players offered measured takes that tried, and often failed, to avoid acknowledging how genuinely strange the moment felt. One widely shared comment cut through the noise with uncomfortable directness. She beat the number 2 in the world, and her next opponent withdrew. The WTA needs to acknowledge what they're watching. The WTA, predictably, released no such acknowledgement, but the conversation was already beyond containment. And here's what nobody was saying loudly enough. This wasn't just about one tournament. Something in women's tennis had permanently shifted. Stay with this. The day after Bados's withdrawal, Greg Rysovsky, former British number one, appeared on his podcast and attempted to contextualize Ala's Miami run with the kind of analytical distance that broadcasting demands. He described her as possessing Manny Pacquiao energy, a reference that landed with particular resonance across Southeast Asia, where Pacquiao's legacy as a national sporting deity requires no introduction. Rysetsky spoke about her serve development, about the facets of her game still requiring refinement, about the realities of sustaining elite-level performance across a full season. He was measured. He was professional. He was also speaking about a wild card who had just reached a WTA 1000 semifinal, a feat no Filipino tennis player had ever accomplished, and whose previous two victories included a Grand Slam champion and the world number two. The Philippine press needed no measured language. Ala consumed every front page, every sports broadcast, every corner of national conversation. The country that had watched Pacquiao carry their flag across decades of boxing now watched a 20-year-old woman do the same thing in a sport where Filipino representation had essentially been non-existent at this level. She was the first Filipino to enter the WTA Top 100, the first Filipino to reach a WTA 1000 semifinal, the first Filipino woman to defeat a Grand Slam champion at tour level. Every first carried weight. Every record broken opened a conversation about what came next. But beneath the celebration, quieter voices in the tennis community were asking something that the joyful noise frequently drowned out. How does a player ranked 140th do this? Not once, not by accident, consistently against elite opposition in a high-stakes environment across multiple consecutive rounds. The standard explanations felt insufficient. Hot streak, opponent errors, Miami's specific surface conditions. Each offered as a partial answer, each acknowledged as failing to fully account for what actually transpired. Former champions who'd faced moments of extraordinary athletic elevation in their own careers, moments where everything aligned and the competition felt strangely suspended, recognized something in Ala's Miami performance that went beyond tactical explanation. Some things in sport exist at a frequency that analysis cannot fully capture. What came next, in the semifinals and beyond, would either confirm that Ala had scaled an impossible height or reveal something even more extraordinary. Don't stop watching. Jessica Pegula ended it. In the semifinals, Eala faced the American fourth seed, and this time the margin didn't fall her way. Pegula's experience, her ability to neutralize pace, her clinical consistency across extended rallies, these proved decisive. Eala competed. She extended the match, forced Pegula to work for every point, demonstrated that her presence in that semifinal was earned rather than gifted. But she lost. And in losing, she did something counterintuitively powerful. She made the entire tournament feel real rather than mythological. A wildcard story that ends in a completed semifinal after defeating 3 elite opponents, including the world number 2, lands differently than one that somehow, impossibly, goes all the way. It's believable. It's extraordinary but human. It's the kind of story that sustains rather than the kind that exhausts. Eala emerged from Miami ranked inside the top 50, 32 on arrival, 46 after her subsequent clay court campaign, then climbing again, methodically, organically, the way careers built on genuine substance tend to climb. She reached the final at Eastbourne. She won her first WTA 125 title in Guadalajara. She finished 2025 with a career-high ranking of 50th in the world. The wild card from Miami hadn't been a moment. It had been a declaration. But the Badosa chapter refused to fade from collective memory, because the question it raised, the quiet, slightly uncomfortable question that nobody in official tennis circles would directly address, wasn't really about injury protocols or withdrawal timing. It was about something the sport occasionally encounters and rarely knows how to discuss. What happens when an athlete operates at a level that exceeds not just tactical preparation, but psychological readiness? What happens when opposing players arrive at a match against someone who has just defeated the world's second-best player, someone who seemingly grows more dangerous as the stakes elevate, and something inside them, some deep competitive calculus, begins calculating odds that don't favor engagement? Sports history is lined with these moments. Opponents who found reasons to withdraw, competitors who discovered ailments on the morning of a match against someone operating in an uncatchable zone. None of it proves anything. All of it suggests something. And here's the part that will follow Eala for the rest of her career, because what she built in Miami didn't just change her ranking, it changed how opponents see her name in a draw. There's a moment, rare in sport, impossible to manufacture, when a single tournament permanently alters the gravitational field around an athlete. Before Miami, Alex Eala was a promising prospect, a name to monitor, someone who might, with continued development and favorable draws, eventually become a consistent presence in the later rounds of significant tournaments. After Miami, she was a threat, a documented, bracket-disrupting, seed-eliminating threat who had demonstrated, not suggested, demonstrated the capacity to defeat anyone on the women's tour on a given day. That distinction matters enormously in professional tennis, because the draw itself is psychological warfare. Opponents study brackets, coaches prepare game plans, seeds choose their preferred paths towards finals. When a name enters a draw that carries the verified ability to end the ambitions of top 10 players, the entire tournament ecosystem recalibrates around that name. Eala had spent years building toward a moment that could redefine her identity within the sport. That moment arrived at Miami as a wild card. She seized it with both hands across multiple rounds against opponents who were supposed to be insurmountable. The withdrawal of Badosa, whatever its medical legitimacy, became a symbol woven permanently into Eala's origin story, not because it proved anything definitive, but because it arrived at the precise moment when the tennis world was already beginning to ask, is this real? Is this sustainable? Is this someone we genuinely cannot predict? The symbol landed, and it landed hard. She went on from Miami to continue building. The clay court season, Stuttgart, more victories, more records. The first Filipino inside the top 100. The first Filipino woman carrying genuine expectations into Grand Slam draws. Her mother, Riza, the former competitive swimmer who understood athletic sacrifice at a cellular level, watched all of it from a distance that carried decades of context. Her daughter hadn't just broken through. She'd broken through at a level that created entirely new terrain for every Filipino athlete who followed. And across the archipelago that had once watched Pacquiao make the world pay attention, a country of over 100 million people, a 20-year-old woman with a racket was doing something no compatriot had managed before. She was winning, consistently, against the best, in front of the world. The WTA may have stayed speechless after Badosa's withdrawal. The history books didn't. Alex Eala arrived at Miami as nobody's prediction and departed as everybody's problem. She defeated 3 elite opponents, advanced farther than any Filipino in WTA 1000 history, and watched a world-ranked professional withdraw before facing her, a moment the tennis world still hasn't fully processed. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a hot week that fades from memory. This was the birth of a legacy that the sports establishment is only beginning to reckon with. Was Badosa's withdrawal just injury, or was Alex Eala already so dominant that her presence alone became the obstacle? Drop your answer below. The debate is very much alive. If this story moved you, subscribe, because this is just the beginning of what Eala is about to do to women's tennis.